discussion of the lesson. And usually we start with the teacher who taught the lesson, reflect on the lesson, and also I'm going to ask him to bringing up some of the questions that he wants to discuss with this group of people. So, turn to you.
Okay, thank you all for coming to check out the lesson. It was very exciting. It was technically the fourth time we had taught it, right? Because she did it with her 2 classes yesterday. I wasn't in there to see it, but I did it this morning, and things went a little bit differently this morning than it did in general. To the point where the lessons were already printed out, but I thought of changing the title of the lesson from like the aha moment versus into like the huh moment. Like I feel like that's more of what the lesson was like, or should be kind of almost like, because it's important for us to think of the lesson in the context of a unit. That we don't have lessons that are just one-offs and that they walk away mastering some standard and giving extra tickets and like, wow, they all can divide with remainders. But like this is the first lesson in a unit of 11 lessons. And day 2, I know like as it's in the unit plan too, is like we'll be going back, summarizing, talking about connections between the strategies and noticing like, wow, this is something we can divide and have some left over. And like I thought, what like with the earlier lesson and today, what better way to start a unit than on a confusing note where they're like, how can we do this, and grappling with the topic. That's why at first I didn't just ask them for strategies right off the bat. We said go ahead and do it. I was kind of surprised about the number of kids that were doing some strategy, because there were about, just randomly guessing, probably like 7 or 8 kids that were really slow to start, like not doing it, or like we're multiplying 14 times 3 or something, or just sitting there, and we wanted them to embrace those 2 or 3 minutes of being really challenged. And I think a lot of times we overly try and like help kids and spoon feed them what they need to versus like face the math and do something that's harder. And like for the next 2 weeks, they'll think back to this moment when they first saw this problem and were thinking about, is that possible? Is it impossible? Like it's something a lot of students will start with tomorrow too, because they're like, it's still not possible, but they need to clarify that it's possible. You'll just have unequal groups, so you'll have something left over. So like there's a lot of fodder for us to talk about tomorrow. I'd like for you guys, I know that I had notes on, and Danielle and I had notes on like half the kids, but I'd like to hear from you guys like what you saw, if kids are changing strategies, if you really did see them like building their understanding through the lesson, and at what point you think that came, so we could target our discussion towards like student like thinking and learning, and how you think that went through the lesson throughout. And other takeaways you saw from reflections and things. I know that we had 60 eyes in the room. It's more than just the 4 of us, so it's always going to be great to talk about things we've noticed in terms of what the students are sharing.
Thank you. Since Daniela was a part of the planning team, and then she also taught the lesson on capacity, so maybe you can share some of the things you observed today and what is similar, different, or what your thoughts.
Sure, I think it was interesting to see the progression, because I had an opportunity to see all 4 lessons take place. So the first lesson that I taught was tweaked. The second lesson was better. The third lesson was what we saw this morning when Leland had taught it. We were able to go over maybe certain strategies for how to make a connection and express how the kids were feeling when they were presented with a problem that they didn't know how to solve, and how to sort of label that frustration and put a name to that frustration. And then in a lot of their reflections, being able to say, this didn't exist at first. 14 divided by 3 wasn't equal to anything in some cases, or some kids had written down things like, you can't do 14 divided by 3. But then today I was able to X, Y, Z, whatever strategy it was that they chose to do. So I think that sort of progression in their understanding and their ability to grapple with a problem that they're unaware of initially was very interesting across the 4 classes, and especially today, what they were able to do.
So, like, things seems easier, but it's really difficult, and that's the kind of thing that I think is surprising for the students to show. So, related with what they said, if you want to share some of the observation of the students, please share your observation what they, and particularly the leader also mentioned that do they change their strategies and why? And so if you the students that you observed, and if you can share that, that would be helpful.
I watched Jeremy and Layla for basically the whole lesson, and so both of them were really interesting. And Jeremy seemed to conceptually know, but he had trouble writing down, I think, what he was thinking. And he walked up to the board, didn't he?
Yeah,
And
he
was the one who
explained someone
explained,
else's
and he
picture.
did a great job. And first of all, thank you, Neil, for just inviting us into your classroom. Just a fantastic lesson with it. So, thank you. He did change his strategies, which is quite interesting. And he first started out with multiplication. And then he actually sat there and he stopped. And I think he found the answer he did. And then once it was presented that there were more strategies, he actually took the approach of repeated subtraction. And he had something interesting where he got down to 5 minus 3 equals 2, and then he did 3 minus 2 equals 1, which was interesting. And I would want to sort of question him, what was that, expression meaning to him. And then he also had a visual representation where he started out with 3 groups. And this is also what Layla had as well. They started out with the 3 groups. And you actually intervened with Layla?
Leia.
Leia, sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
And it was natural for them to go with, I think, some of that quotative division, even though they had connections to the quotative one. So it was a really interesting progression. I'm really curious to see where their learning is in the next day's lesson, if they can bridge those gaps. Ultimately.
Yeah, that was a major part of like the lesson plan, what we debated about going between quotative and partitive. Like, would it be better for them to have the quota, like 3 each? How many had 3? And like, as adults, it seems like imperative, like 4 have 3, but then they're like, could we make 1 into 3? In the earlier class, yeah, students did. Juan was so persistent about sharing that too. Like the 2 minus 3 would be -1. Like he like kept having his hand raised, like I need to share this. I'm like, all right, we'll honor this. Like I wanted to give him that aside to kind of address the -1. But yeah, we discussed this morning about whether like the Singapore style, where their first problem is 14 divided by 4, in the sense that we have 14 books and put them on 4 shelves. And that is partitive when you make it into 4 groups. And why does that work? Because they're not like apples, dividing them into 4 people, because then if that doesn't work, apples don't work because you need to cut them into pieces, right? But books, them today, like addressing like you can't have half a book or you can't split that up. That is one way, versus today, like you can't have half a bag. Like it was hard for kids to understand that. Like I was trying to bring them back to a person who's in the book called Jill. Maybe you heard me say that, like, oh, what about Jill? It's a poster of this girl. It's like, we don't like unequal groups. So I still think like it's just a preference. I don't know if part of necessarily is better for this sake. It's very limited in the sense of you have to have objects that you can't split up. And that was something maybe you guys saw too, of many kids wanting to talk about a fraction or like a decimal, or it's 3.5 or 4.5 bags, things like that. Was a very natural kind of inclination for them too.
Joshua just refused to accept that was the number. He was like, actually, I don't think that's the right number. The number is, he kept trying to change the number.
Yeah.
Any observation you might want to share?
There was a young girl kind of by the window, and when she first started the strategies, kind of before you guys discussed it, she wrote out a whole bunch of 3s, and the 5th 3 she wrote, and then she was like kind of lightly erasing it, saying, you know what, I don't really believe that belongs there. Then I think she tried repeated subtraction. And it was kind of interesting to kind of see her reflection at the end. It was just like, she said something this sort of that some people kind of thought it was impossible, but it was for me it was easy. I just kind of forgot about the 2. There's 4 bags. Like, so she really took it very literally. How many bags could I create? Well, there are going to be 4 full bags. So for her, I think it was kind of a literal like idea. It's like 4 full bags. That's how she kind of interpreted the problem all along. So it's kind of interesting, just that hesitation of wanting to erase. It was really neat to see.
First of all, thanks, Leland, for inviting us. I really enjoyed being in class. I think what's really interesting about this lesson is that there's an issue about interpretation, right? So many students were able to sort of execute the problem using a strategy that they knew. But what became difficult, I think, for them was interpreting what it meant. For example, a kid doing repeated subtraction, he got to the end of it, but didn't know where the answer lay inside of that, right? So each of those 3s is, that connection between each of those 3s representing bags is on its way to being developed, but hasn't yet. So there's a child in the back row, a boy in the left side. I don't know if you're interested in that. And then he got to 2. Yeah, against the window, back row, left. And so he got to 2 minus 3 and just wrote can't do.
Yeah, crossed it off. Was that Devin? Yeah, Devin crossed.
Yeah.
You did 2 minus 3 and then or can't do and cross it off. Yeah, oh, sorry.
So that's one thing about the repeated subtraction method I think that is challenging for kids is being able to follow that process. And then he tried another strategy. He did 14, and he had 3 groups of 14. So he tried sort of 2 different ways and wasn't able to necessarily reconcile that he'd gotten sort of different answers for them, and actually what the answer really could be. So anyway, that was just one situation.
Jennifer?
So I was watching the 2 girls in the back on the right, and I didn't get their names.
Okay, furthest back, Madison and Sade.
Okay, so Madison, I believe, right away went to the picture, and she had a very nice picture, kind of like 3 balloons she was gathering, and she had, she drew 3, and then she wrote a number 1, and then she drew another 3 balloons as a collection, and then 3 lollipops as a collection, and then wrote 2, and then another group of 3, and then wrote 3, another group of 3, and wrote 4, and then put 2, and then just left them alone. And her neighbor, I don't know if she was looking at her work or what
Collaborating,
she was
sure.
collaborating, but she drew the same picture, but she labeled the first set of lollipops 6. And then I was confused, and then she labels the next set 9, and the next set 12, and then the next set 15. And then she's definitely confused, because now she's got more than the 14 lollipops, and I see her using her fingers to try to figure out how many, and then she erases those numbers, and I didn't get back to see what she had changed this to, but she somehow wasn't having a connection between the picture and what she was documenting, which may be what Josh is saying too. And though her neighbor was very clear and was seeing this as 1 group of 3, 2 groups of 3, 3 groups of 3, she was, I guess, trying to identify how many lollipops, but miscounted. Maybe should have started with 3 and started with 6. There was definitely some disconnect about what the picture really meant there. But I also wanted to compliment you both on, as Makoto and I have looked into multiplication and multiplier and multiplicand becomes like an obsession of my life, and thinking about, whether it should be multiplicand times multiplier or multiplier times multiplicand, and I saw the poster up on your board, and you kept to it very clearly. I was checking, I was like, I'm gonna catch him, but it was multiplicand times multiplier, and you did it every single time. You were very consistent about it, and I know, and we talked to Makoto and Bill about this, that we've wanted that consistency to help students understand the meaning of multiplication, and I was just really impressed that you could hold that, because sometimes I even have a moment of pause up there in front of the room to say, like, am I doing that right? But you obviously have been clear, and have you been clear about that with them all along too?
Try to, yeah. I think something, thanks for making me think of this, Jen, is Danielle and I were discussing today that we could take any kid's notebook up there and post it, because everyone has a valid kind of point that they're doing, other than the ones that were like doing 14 times 3. That ended up, we didn't redirect them, they got towards what they needed to. But like anything we had, like Aisha's just writing the, hi, sorry, I'm talking about you, I forgot she's in the room. But her writing in all the 3 facts, if that's something important that they could learn from looking at this notebook. And it's not just like, and yeah, Madison's picture, that would have been great to show too, that it's hard, like if we did this lesson 10 times, like, and we could rewind it and do it again, we might have picked so many other journals of like things that were perfect strategies, things that were one-off. This morning I showed one where a student drew and they labeled each kid like who would get a bag or whatever, and did 5 bags with 3 in each, and we talked about that. And well, actually you don't have this, so I was gonna erase one, and I think it was just really interesting. Maybe you guys saw other cool things in notebooks that you might have showed on the board or whatever. It's always like the people we picked were kind of pre-chosen based on, well, that's what we were walking around. I think Danielle's the silent star of the show, as like co-teaching models should be, like an observing teacher that goes through and finds things and sifts and winnows and lets me know, and we consult and we confer about who it should be. And the people I picked, besides at the beginning, was that, who did I pick? Sky, that said 15. Like that was just like, that was my one like Hail Mary where I'm just like, are you gonna say the right number? It was like, how many lollipops do you think it is? This morning they were like saying 16, 17. It's like, oh, but that was the only time basically in the lesson where I didn't know what a kid would say, other than like what Juan was saying. But yeah, it was really cool. What else did you guys, do we have time for more?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I was interested in the same 2 girls, and I watched her change her strategy. That was the Sade and Madison in the back. And you could see after she wrote down her number, she was like, whoa, no. And then she did erase them, she went back, and I think then she started like looking at the groups and writing down the groups again. So she modified it, like there was sometimes something that was automatic about what she was doing, and then she realized that that automaticity was wrong. And like you could see her just kind of like, no, and she went through and kind of has like erased things, but you could still see like her brow was furrowed. So I felt like I thought it was really cool that she was sitting with that uncertainty. Like it seemed like there was wheels turning.
This is more of a question. So a couple of things. I'm interested in the move to choosing to share out like 3 strategies that we want to focus on after a couple of minutes, as opposed to going into it. And then I'm also interested in why not have a conversation around, like a lot of the kids are like, oh, it's 4.5, but like, which it obviously isn't. Like it's like you can just like, is it exactly half? Fine, let's move it. But like just the number of students that brought that up, like it was something that I was like, I wanted to speak to, and it's like obviously like we're not addressing this now, and so I just want to hear about the reasoning behind it.
I think your first question about why certain strategies were listed out first on the board, are you talking about that?
But like weren't like after it was like
just
4
like
minutes, 3 minutes in
or
something. Yeah.
multiplication. So I think
No, she means like that.
oh.
We just said like go where.
Just go, and then
didn't
after
have- we
highlighting
talked
those
about that.
strategies.
Well, I guess to have them just go and work is what we just wanted to see them, like, what would they do exactly? So just to get like that initial feel for who in the room is going to use a multiplication strategy, who's going right to a picture, who's completely stuck and does not know what to do at all, who's doing something that's maybe not moving in the right direction of what we want them to do. So just to kind of get a gauge of what's happening in the room. And then I think Leland went to the move of naming 3 different strategies that kids might use, and I think when that had happened, I had seen a number of kids who did certain things like 14 times 3 and realized like, let me try drawing a picture of this and see if it makes sense. So it actually was able to redirect a lot of their thinking without us having to intervene in that, and also without anyone else sharing out a larger idea that would kind of morph what they were thinking. They were kind of able to redirect their thinking with just a word or 2 to have them think about something
So
differently.
did you do that in every lesson, or did you find
No.
you needed to? Okay.
No, so when I first taught the lesson, I didn't do that initially. I went right into, okay, try some strategies. I had walked around the room, found who had certain strategies, and then we went right into discussing those strategies right away. So it didn't necessarily give a chance to certain kids who
To even try.
needed that, extra try, The second part of your question was about the half.
Functions, decimals, all
Right.
of that.
Did we?
Yeah, I wrote on the, so a Kier called out, I would wrote what like other kids said, and like he's like, you can't have half a bag, like I'm kind of, that was like fodder for, like a kid yells out a half, I wanna see if someone else will like yell something out to that, and like I did talk to Juan at the end, where he said like it would be like 2/3, which is like interesting because like I don't think it's really wrong, right? But, and he didn't just say half, because half is just, if any kid says, 2/3 of a bag. And like that is great math. But and the fact this is in the unit plan too, if you go back through it and check closely, it says like most kids would just say a half, like it's less than 1, so half. Like, and we just, even if it was 2 out of 4, that's why the divisor was not 4, right? It would be 3, so then we would not have a half, so it wouldn't have validity. But yeah, this morning a student called out like, you can't have half a bag. So that was something I like write that down as like a super sphere or like a strong, interesting comment. And that's something that we'll keep going and we'll bring up in a future lesson of like, oh, I remember before many people said this. It's not like, it's like tabling, like put a pin in it, like some great conversations for when we get specifically to a partitive situation. This, when you're talking about part of like half of a group, is less so makes sense versus if you're talking about cutting up apples or something like, well, you'd have 2 apples left. Maybe we could, maybe like when we get a little older, like while you were in 5th grade, we'll talk about what you do with those, or we could if it is a friendly denominator.
Okay, maybe I have a question. So.
Okay.
So the one of the things I would like to mention is that when the students were called up to the explaining, the students were actually explaining about somebody else's thinking. I think that was very impressive, that how much kids can be able to observe what other students are doing. But the question that I have is that I think everybody's interested in how you're going to make a closure tomorrow. So if you can maybe share some of your thinking about how you want to close this, so that the students understand that they can use a multiplication and then have a division and then show the remainder.
Okay, sure. So the nice thing about using the whiteboard is that that's staying up there all night. It's going to be there tomorrow, and that's how we launch our lesson tomorrow with both classes, because we both did the lesson today. We'll look back at it, the board's very similar, and we'll go through and actually make connections through the strategies, kind of. So what we're going to be doing is like, oh, what do you see in all of them? Like, oh, they all can make 4 bags. They all have 2 remaining. Like, okay, so all of these have these important parts. Whenever we divide, we want to make sure that we have like a dividend, divisor, quotient, and sometimes even a remainder, or as you told me, a remainder of 0. There's some things that we'll talk about in terms of connections to the strategies. Also, closing is, I want to bring a commentary up about the strategies. Like, what do you notice about repeated subtraction now? And a big thing I'll lead them towards, probably, they won't like be able to say it, but repeated subtraction before was easy because they would subtract down the familiar products that they would know, right? So if you're starting at 42 and you're dividing it by 7, you're subtracting, and each time, since it is divisible, it's going down a product they know. So it's so easy. But if it's 43 divided by 7, then they're like, what? Now it's like a different number that I've ever seen in the differences, and it gets harder. So like, we'll look at it closely. 14 minus 3, 11. 11 minus 3 is 8. Like this kind of jumping down. I see it's taking 3 away each time, but these are strange numbers. I want to comment on that and talk about how multiplication, it works, but you can't find that answer. What I probably am going to show more kids examples of their notebooks. I'll go through and look and talk more about common mistakes they make and make a kind of summary. Today was a reflection. The summary could basically, at the end of day 2, could be like, we can divide any number by a smaller divisor as long as, but sometimes we might have some left over, or we might have some remaining, like because we were the debate of is it possible or isn't possible. That's in lesson 2. We're debating on if you say divisible or indivisible with liberty and justice for all. But do you say that 26 divided by 8 is indivisible, or do you say you can divide it but you will have a remainder? So we're gonna try and get there tomorrow. Like you can always divide, but sometimes, actually most time, you will have a remainder. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the last
Can I make one other comment?
yeah.
Just, Dakota, when you mentioned that sort of move about explaining others' ideas, it made me think of one other teaching move that I saw, which I thought was really cool, was having students think about what the question is, right? You're posed with some information and asking the students to say, what are some possible questions we could have? I think that that's a really good strategy for just teaching word problems in general. Like once they get that information and then they have to say, okay, it could be, how many oranges do we have? How many are in each group? Like when kids are starting to be able to do that kind of work, I think that they're really starting to understand the gestalt of the problem much better, you know? One question I had was there any reason to have the students not talk to each other for a period of time before bringing the group as a whole, or talk about that idea? Or?
Sure. It was mostly, I would guess, like the setting. Like we have a very, like, I mean, before you guys walked in, that room was like really loud. They were talking a lot, so they're out of their seat. This morning, would you say too, the kids were naturally like, wow, that when we posed that up there, we stepped back and they were all kind of like arguing and debating. Remember, like a lot of like, you can do this, that. Like normally, that's if you've seen a lot of times my placement in the room, I'll like walk to the side or behind them, and that kind of opens the gates for them, like to talk and to like look at someone else's or to debate. Like you can do no. They'll like say something. They're very talkative, so they'll just say something off the cuff, and some kid will hear it and be like, "Are you sure about that?" Like usually that's like the relationship. I don't know if it's rapport or what you say the kids normally have. Today, like in this context of hovering people around, as we stepped back to do it, there wasn't as much like banter or eagerness to go back and forth. But yeah, thanks for the question.
I think I need to give time for Bill Jackson. So if you have a question, you can ask right after. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Bill Jackson, he used to work at the HBA, and he's one of the very experienced lesson study practitioners. I worked with him more than 15 years before, and he did numerous public lessons in front of many people. So Bill Jackson, he will give us some of his thoughts.
How much time?
15 minutes.
Okay.
Is that too short?
Well,
Maybe too long. So thank you, Leland and Daniela, for planning this lesson, and Makoto. I know you were also involved in working with them. And I think the first thing I just want to mention is that the beautiful thing about lesson study is that if they had not planned this lesson, we wouldn't be having this very interesting conversation. And I think there's a lot of about this conversation about mathematics specifically, but also about students, because we saw a lot of interesting things. And there's a lot of things I think that happen in the lesson that just go maybe maybe we don't perceive everything that happens because they just happen so automatically. Like for example, when he wrote the problem, kids automatically started opening their notebooks. He said write it, but they didn't even need the prompt. I would be interested if you didn't say to them to write it. I bet you they would just write it by themselves. And you may want to try that next time. But the kids already have the habit of opening up their notebooks, and also the students are not only writing their own methods in the notebooks, but they're writing their friends' methods. So when the friends are coming up to the board, they're actually writing those methods in their book without being prompted, or with very little prompting. So I think that this is, you can see that the habits of mind have been developed carefully over the year. And that's really takes a lot of work. The board organization, the relating the board to what students are thinking, and also the students writing reflections in their journals. And do you begin the next lesson by having them read back some of those reflections?
Yeah, I mean, in the best world, I've done it several times, but not dozens, which I wish, is a lot of times like we'll go through, like as a co-teacher, and you look through, you type them up and then glue it. I definitely think, I know for a fact that there were a lot of kids that wanted to share today, and I will honor that tomorrow. And a lot of times when we're leaving on a hanging note, like what are we gonna do? A lot of times we'll start and readdress with the reflections, yeah.
The teaching through problem-solving method, I think, is a very difficult method to master, because that means you have to throw out a problem at the beginning of the lesson instead of just teaching by telling. And if you read the lesson plan, which was very well constructed, they mention specifically that they don't want to do I do, we do, you do as a mode of teaching. And I think in colleges, that's basically what's taught. The teacher demonstrates something I do, and then we do it together, some kind of like guided practice or something, and then you try it on your own. And this is very different. And I think that what I really liked was they mentioned in the plan that they wanted students to face the math. So they wanted to create this cognitive dissonance. And that, I think, was created because at the beginning of the lesson, kids were saying, I wrote down some of the things that they were saying. It's not fair. It's uneven. We could use 2, but it would be 2 times 7. What's the math sentence? Like that. So like the kids, they were saying those things out loud. And so that means there was some sort of they were perplexed. And so then the trick of the teaching through problem solving is, now will we be able to overcome that confusion? I think the key one was right here. It said, that's impossible. So I guess my question is, did that come from the kids, or did the teacher say that's impossible? I'm not sure what the answer to that is, because I know some kids might have been saying that.
Oh, I mean, not to whisper that. Yeah,
She
she's
said
like,
it out loud.
that's impossible,
Yeah.
right?
She said it out
So,
loud.
and you wrote that's impossible. So I'm just wondering if that needed a little bit more kind of discussion about why you think that's impossible. And then the question is not only that's impossible, what's impossible is the question. So I think kids weren't totally sure what they were trying to find out in some cases. Were they trying to find the answer to 14 divided by 3? Or were they trying to find the number of bags? The problem was posed, how many bags can we make? But kids were writing things like, you can't do it. And I think in their mind, they were the ones that said you can't do it, were thinking you can't divide 14 divided by 3. Not that you couldn't make a number of bags. You can make that number of bags, but you can't divide 14 divided by 3. So that might be an interesting, well, you can, but in their mind you can't. So it might be an interesting discussion to have. And I think one way to maybe that could possibly help is relating, I like the way that